I'm not affiliated with these people. I'm clearly not subscribed to this guy. I've never seen his material before. But what he's saying is 100% true. So I'm going to share it with you and I'm going to comment on it. Sorry, Rachie. You don't need to be
Owes 9 trillion. The entire planet owes 315 trillion, 3 times the size of the global economy. But here's the paradox that should terrify you. If everyone owes money, who exactly is owed?
This actually should not terrify you. This shouldn't terrify you. If you know anything about numbers and you know the basics, if you know the basics of global economic theory since the 17th century, you have had 400 years to catch up. If you understand the basics, you will understand that every time someone comes to me with an economic nightmare and I'm totally blasé about it, it's not because I'm affecting my cynicism or my stoicism. It is because this should help you sleep at night. This is why I spend money on credit like it's coming back to me. Like, subscribe, and hit that super like button.
The answer isn't what you think. Because when you follow the chain of creditors, when you track who actually holds the debt, you discover something disturbing. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular, it owes money to itself. But 4 men, 4 bankers across 3 centuries, designed it that way.
And so you might ask yourself, especially you might write this in such a way that the answer is self-evident, but why should that terrify you? If the global economy is whose line is it anyway, the rules are made up, the points don't matter, and nobody wins. If the goal of the global economy is perpetual growth, an increasing middle class, and the erasure of poverty through debt and money that cannot stop growing, that should not terrify you. God does not terrify you. The moon should not terrify you. Things that happen perpetually because they cannot stop should not terrify you. This should not cause you to lie awake at night. If a guy who calls himself Dude Enough and uses a cartoon similitude of his face as his identity online can tell you why this should terrify you in simple enough terms that you walk away both agreeing with and understanding his information, capable of regurgitating it in ways to make other people terrified, if then sentence. If this can be done at all, then if presenting this information at all can be done, then the thing that is being presented as fearsome to you must also be so radically simple that you can understand it and therefore, by definition, cannot be afraid of it. If this video can exist, then this thing cannot be terrifying because, by definition, fear is ignorance. Terror is, by definition, that cyclical thing which you cannot control. If this financial system has been built across 100 years, it's actually been built across very nearly 400 years, to continue to grow, to keep everyone equally in debt, everyone equally in debt to nothing and everything, but specifically the future, in debt to the future, to grow and prosper and be there for the future, to be the future. If you can understand that, then you cannot be terrified of it because that is a positive goal.
deliberately. They built a system where debt can never be repaid, where governments borrow forever, where interest flows eternally upward.
This makes sense. This makes sense. Look at the United States government. Look at it. It has been on lockdown. How did they break the lockdown? And what were they in lockdown? What were they in gridlock over? They were in gridlock over taking out debt to provide health care for immigrants who were in the country via illegal methods, aka illegal immigrants. You want to make the argument, how can a human being be illegal? The answer is a government can put statutes in its books that make certain methods of entering their country illegal in themselves. That's how you can be an illegal person. You can be in someone's home illegally. You can be in a city illegally. You can be in a province of a greater nation illegally. And you can be inside a nation or its territorial holdings illegally. Just like if Great Britain were to drive a battle cruiser right into Boston Harbor today, that would be an illegal trespass. A person of citizenship outside the United States entering the United States without the United States' permission or awareness is illegal for good reasons. Our government was in gridlock because the Democrats wanted to give those people free health care, which would encourage more of those people to immigrate illegally, which means that now you have a massive criminal contingent inside your country, because people do not immigrate illegally if they are in your country to do legal things. People are in your country illegally to sell drugs, weapons, and human lives. Those are the only reasons anyone immigrates illegally. And you know how they get to the immigration process? Debt. So if you control the debt, then the debt cannot be weaponized to force people below the poverty line into selling drugs, into selling weapons, or into selling their bodies. If you want to know when the economy is good, all you have to do is look for porn in public. If you can find porn in public, the economy is bad, because the people who are performers are selling their bodies.
The people who designed the trap profit from every payment, every crisis, every bailout.
This is not true. They cannot profit from these things because they do not own the debt. The debt is to the planet. The debt is to no one. The debt is owed to no one. These people print money and they thumbs up what are called subprime debt, subprime loans. They thumb these things up because the money has to be there to buy the shit that's produced, because the only thing that's scored, the only thing that's graded is production. Production has to happen in order for there to be shit in the economy, because supply does not demand itself. So the stuff has to be present. For example, I, Shaggy Phil Alitea. Hello, by the way. I'm Shaggy. I'm Phil Alitea, burying the lead. I cannot sell shirts that do not already exist. They already have to have the slogan. They already have to have that printed on a shirt that exists. And they have to exist in a store where people can go to demand them. The stuff has to be being made. In order for the stuff to be made, it has to be produced by someone. In order for someone to be producing that thing, you have to have two things. And in an increasingly global and complex economy, you have to have an increasingly complexly educated. Bottom line. Your base population have to be increasingly complexly educated. The complexity of their education has to increase along with technological advancement. And so what that means is that small children need to understand the fundamentals of production. What that means is that our early childhood education is completely inadequate to our technology. What that means is that small children as early as 10, need to be able to build smartphones from scratch, but that cannot happen because of what you should be terrified by: corporate intellectual property. You should not be worried about debt. The corporations are in debt in order to pay payroll. In order to pay their payroll, they have to be in debt. Why? Because they don't have the product until they've paid their employees, their producers. Until you've paid the production, which means bought materials, bought a factory, paid for your employees, paid payroll, you don't have a product to sell. Every single product that goes to market is already many, many hundreds of percent in debt. This is why new items, innovation, new product, new ideas, new approaches, new things, novelty is always so expensive because it's saddled with 10,000% debt before it ever hit okay, what do we put this, what is our MSRP for this to make profit enough to stay alive long enough to go public with the proof of concept that we can make a product that sells, not even that this will sell. Google went public with the proof of concept that they could make money off a fucking search engine. The most basic thing that an internet needs. The most basic element that any internet needs is a functioning search engine. Google exists as a public company because they were able to demonstrate a proof of concept that they could make a search engine, a necessary function of any internet, profitable. It's not a bad thing. You should learn the lessons of the economy that you exist in. It is no longer the pre-1969 economy. And even this guy is terrifying you, not me, Shaggy Phil Alitea, this dude enough, is terrifying you with historical facts and data so you will not enter the new economy and threaten his livelihood.
This isn't
And I know I am leaving chads of thought hanging all over the place.
conspiracy. This is documented history. The meetings happened. The contracts exist.
It is a conspiracy. What it isn't is a theory. Idiot.
The mechanisms are public record. And once you see how they built it, you'll understand why 38 trillion isn't a problem to be solved. It's the system working exactly as designed.
So if it's not a problem to be solved, it's the system working exactly as designed, then it isn't terrifying because you now understand it and it's not a problem to be solved. A terror is a Grindel, is a Grindel's child. Grindel's mother. Terrors are Grindel and Grindel's mother. You're terrified of something that comes to your village or your longhouse, kills your men, eats your children, takes your wine, sleeps with your women, and leaves. Like migrant workers.
Let me show you the four architects, the four moments when the debt trap was engineered, and why every government on Earth is now caught inside it with no way out.
It's not a trap. If it's the system as it's designed, then it's not a trap. Think about it. If it's a trap, then you can Disarm it. If it's a trap, you can disarm it. If it's a trap, you don't want to get into it. If it's a spike trap, you die at the bottom. You eventually starve and die. But this doesn't create starvation and death and isolation. This trap, so to speak, is not a pit trap. It's not a hole in the ground. It's not a bear trap that holds you in place and kills you because it's bit into your leg and it's broken bone and you're now bleeding. This is a person who uses words without any, this dude enough, is a person who uses words with no fundamental understanding of how words and what they mean, what they indicate. He uses them as pure abstractions. But a trap is something that kills you or holds you in place so you can be killed. This is not putting governments into slavery. This is giving governments the liquid wealth they need in order to stimulate parts of the economy, parts of their classes, entire classes, the entire population, when their education is not as complex as the world around them. There are two ways to govern an entire world. There are two ways. You can give people total liberty to be themselves and pursue what they want, or you can tell them what they need to be doing. In the former thing, you arrive at prosperity. You arrive at prosperity by allowing the economy to do what it's going to do, to allow entrepreneurs to get rich. By just telling people, do whatever you're going to do. You arrive at prosperity that way, because if you do not have prosperity, it is because the government has taken away your prosperity through generations of bad choices. Like arriving at a civil war. The United States had prosperity, lost prosperity. Opened up a free economy because they needed something to happen in order to compete with Europe. Then World War II happened. Prosperity happened globally. Now you have two choices. What are you going to do? You've got this prosperity. Are you going to use this prosperity to now force an economy? Are you going to be communist? Or are you going to use this prosperity to justify people lazing about and getting fat? And so what happens when you use your prosperity to tell people they can do whatever they want, and what people choose to do is sit around and get fat, what happens is the prosperity goes away. But when you have a prosperity engine that, well, fine, it runs on debt. Who gives a shit? When you have a prosperity engine, the number of fat people only increases, because being fat and lazy is aspirational. It has been the only goal of every individual human being since before we were Homo, since before we were meaningfully human. It is the goal of every mammal to have more food and less danger, less risk than they need. This debt does not equal risk. If I bought my laptop on debt, and I didn't pay it off in time. I had to pay the late fee. The risk you run isn't even the late fee. It's that you won't have access to credit anymore. The risk you have in dealing with credit is that you will lose access to credit if you're not smart, if you're not complex in your thinking.
Before 1694, kings borrowed money the old way. They'd go to merchants or nobles, promise repayment with interest, and if they couldn't pay, they'd default.
Did you see that? 1694. This system has been around long enough that you have had time.
Creditors lost money. Kings borrowed from someone else. It was risky for lenders and embarrassing for kings, but
it wasn't embarrassing for the kings. The kings didn't care. It wasn't their money. I don't give a shit if I go into default spending your money, and neither does Donald Trump. Neither does any particular king. What was ruinous, and he's wrong about this, it wasn't bad for the creditors. What was ruinous is that kings were bankrupting entire noble families that had been the backbones of economies in local areas that were minimum 10-day walks, minimum, many of them. But these people, the modern cities, modern states, some of the modern nations were funded on the backbones of individual families. And what happened was that these kings were deliberately bankrupting and putting their noble families into poverty. Not just poverty, stripping them of their titles, of their lands, of their holdings, of their fucking last names. And it was ruinous to the world economy. 1776 didn't happen because the king had enough money to send soldiers over here and quell the rebellion. It didn't play out the way it did because the king had an infinite amount of money to solve the world's problems. Think about that.
It was contained. Debt was temporary, either repaid or defaulted.
And that's not true either. Kings could declare that debts no longer existed.
System cleared. William Paterson changed everything. He was a Scottish merchant and financier.
This guy, Duda Duff, look at his face. Look at this guy's face. Clearly, he is a fan of this guy, because this isn't the only person who is working on this. In fact, choosing a random Scottish guy is to choose the Scottish school of philosophy, which what he's doing is he's a fan. And see, philosophers and thinkers, especially if they think they've engaged with this stuff enough to go public, they're fanboys. Like, I'm a fan of the Bengals, and so when I see things on TikTok about the Bengals, I watch, even if it hurts my feelings, even if it's about how my being a fan of the Bengals is a bad choice, I still watch. This guy thinks he engages in political and economic theory and philosophy. He thinks he engages because he's a fan of this guy. So he's engaged in this guy, he's engaged in the people that this guy has argued with, but he just as easily could have picked Adam Smith. Or, Adam Smith. Just as easily.
Schemer who tried and failed multiple times to get rich. In 1691, he had an idea that would reshape civilization.
Schemer tried and failed to get rich. So,
England was at war with France. King William III needed money desperately. The treasury was empty. Tax revenue couldn't cover war costs. And traditional lenders were refusing new loans because England had defaulted before. Paterson approached the king with a proposal. He would organize a group of wealthy merchants to lend the government £1.2 million. That's about $300 million in today's money.
Now, what he's not telling you, and what he needs you to not know, is that money had to be liquid. You had to hand your soldiers actual coins. Food wasn't enough. And what do we work for today? We work for exposure. Exposure weren't shit back then.
Massive sum. But here's the innovation.
You couldn't just get a job, okay? Right? Because the economy was forced, right? The economy back then was forced. The king decided what people were doing. He decided who got to be merchants, and if you got a job, it was because you were outside the class structure. If you had a job, you were beneath the class structure. Okay? So you couldn't just, if you wanted to be a poet, for example, in the 1600s, you had to work a job, right? But there was no, I'm going to send this to a publishing house or a magazine. That's not how that worked. You had to be famous. You had to know the publisher personally. That hasn't changed.
The loan would never be repaid. Instead, the government would pay interest forever, 8% annually. And to manage this arrangement, Paterson proposed creating a new institution, the Bank of England. The mechanics were revolutionary. The merchant lenders would give their gold to the Bank of England. The bank would lend it to the government. The government.
Yes, and the Eisenhower doctrine is making sure that the banks of England and France collapse, and that those economies collapse, and that those empires collapse under the weight of this very debt system. That's why we left the gold standard in 1969, was to adopt this standard of just permanent debt.
Would pay interest.
The interest, here's the thing you don't understand. Rich people live off the interest accrued off their wealth. They don't live off their wealth. They don't spend their wealth. They don't spend their wealth. They're liquid off their interest. Hear that again. They're liquid off their interest. Literally, they take the things that are interesting to them and they turn them into money-making machines that they can then just live off the interest. They can live off the percentages that are gained just from putting their money into savings. Why? Because when you put your money into savings, it can be reloaned out like 4 times, maybe as many as 8 times. Every dollar you put in can be reloaned out. And so the interest that you accrue from a savings is the bank saying, hey, we made a fuckload of money. here are your dividends for what you invested into what we recouped. That's what interest is. And rich people put so much money into other people's businesses that they recoup interest, and they live lives, fantastic, unimaginable lives, off the interest. And they figured out, oh, if we can live off the interest, then the government can pay its employees off the interest. If the government can pay its employees off the interest, then we can just take out loans, and we can use those loans to make loans. And then we can take the interest we can take the interest that we charge on those loans, and we can spend it on things like healthcare, like roads, like education. This is why the U.S. sells its debt to China, because it's got to make some money somewhere. The U.S. people have been completely non-trust in their currency long enough that the currency should have already collapsed. Our currency backs the entire world because the entire world has to trust in our economy, has to take an interest in our economy, has to fund the United States, because if it doesn't, we go back to being controlled by England, France, and Russia. And who wants that? China sure as fuck doesn't. Every time China is ruled by England, France, or Russia, Japan runs roughshod on their coasts, which means they're women. And I guess that's just the end of this.